And what do you think her three main support systems are? What do you think gives her that power?
Well, thanks very much. Let me say how excited I am to be with you. I've done a lot of events for Madam Speaker, and I've done book clubs for Madam Speaker, but I've never done a book club internationally for this book, or for my first book, which is about Barbara Bush. So I was very excited to get your invitation, especially from Italy, which is, of course, a place that is very near and dear to Nancy Pelosi's heart. In fact, there's speculation here in the United States that when she stops being speaker, which we think will be in about another year, that she might be interested in being named the ambassador to Italy. So we'll see if that happens. But she is a person who is very proud of her Italian roots, and very much sees herself very much as the daughter of Italian immigrants. And so if you think about what she sees as the keys to power, they are really things that she learned from her mother and her father. You know, her father, as you know, really a big figure in American politics in his day, 5 terms as a member of the House of Representatives, 3 terms as mayor of Baltimore. And her mother, something I think that is has been less well known, was really a critical figure too. You know, I think Pelosi talks about understanding what motivates other people. She tries to figure out what it is they need. That isn't always what they ask for. Sometimes she figures out something else they need. She also roots, I think, her approach to power in an actual desire of things to do. That is not power for its own sake. She's had a pretty consistent philosophy about who she's trying to serve as she's been in these positions of increasing political power. And that's one reason she was so determined to push through this latest very big bill, this $2 trillion spending bill that just got through the House last week. A lot of people thought it couldn't get through. It got through because Pelosi is so skilled in understanding her caucus, her legislature, and in being able to deliver this victory, even though she had no margin for error, given the fact that the Congress is so evenly divided.
So what do you think are her main 3 keys of power? So, for example, while we were reading other books on like, for example, in Tony Blair's book, we read that his main source of power was the party Congress. So what do you think what do you think gave power to Nancy Pelosi, or Madam Speaker Pelosi?
You know, her powerful position has never been because she is popular across the country with voters. Her power is centered in the legislature itself and among Democrats in the legislature. She has no support, very little support among Republicans in Congress, but she has very solid support among Democrats, and Democrats can be kind of a squabbling group. So that's no small task. One other source of her power has been her ability to raise money. No member of Congress has ever raised as much campaign funds as Nancy Pelosi has. And that was true before she even ran for Congress. She was a very effective fundraiser in California, her home state. And that gave her an early entree. It helped her win the battle to become a member of the leadership among Democrats in the House. And it's been a source. Believe me, other politicians understand how much money Nancy Pelosi can raise for them or can give to them. And so that has been something that she has also used to her advantage. You know, some people criticize her for that she's been part of a system that really gives big donors a lot of power in American politics. But the fact is, it has been one of the things she's used to hold power herself.
In your book, I think we could, like, great books usually can be summed up in one phrase. And I think your book could be summed up with the phrase, no one gives you power, right? And I was just wondering if you could talk about this, no one gives you power, this phrase, how you came up with it, if she said it or...
Oh, no, she says it. She didn't just say it to me. She has said it for decades to any number of politicians who've come to her and said that I want to be this, I want to be that. Oh, this race is so hard. She says, no one gives you power, you have to seize it. And that is a verbatim lesson from her father. When her father was just getting started in politics, he was at loggerheads with a older, more established Democratic leader in Baltimore. And so he ran against him and he ousted him in the Democratic primary and replaced him in the House of Representatives. This is something that it takes a lot of guts to do, since a lot of people think you shouldn't challenge somebody in your own party. Pelosi's father, Tommy the Elder D'Alessandro, challenged this other guy, took over his seat, started his own political career. And Pelosi in her political career as well followed that same precept. No one's going to give it to you. You've got to take it. So the way she got into leadership, there was a kind of established order on who was going to be the next member of the Democratic leadership in the House. She upset that. Steny Hoyer, who is now her number 2, thought he was going to be the Democratic whip back in 1984. And she challenged him. She ran against him for 3 years. She did a lot of events for members of Congress. She gave money away to members of Congress. She got the California delegation right behind her. That's a huge delegation. And she beat him. And that left scars that he still holds today.
Another phrase that's really memorable in your book is, I'm not sure if I could put it as running before or running earlier. Could I put it that way? Like, Madam Speaker Pelosi always tried to organize her campaign even before the position was open. I'm sure. I was wondering if you could give us some more insight into the advantages one has, or perhaps the disadvantages one has with running earlier.
So this is a lesson that Pelosi took from the only election that she ever lost. And in 1984, 1984 was the year Ronald Reagan won re-election, won 49 states. Walter Mondale, the Democrat, just got trounced. And Pelosi wanted to run to be National Democratic Chairman. She at that point had never run for political office before, but she had been active in party politics. And she didn't want to get started. She didn't think it was appropriate to get started until Mondale lost, because what if Mondale won? Then he'd name his own chairman. Well, none of the other people who wanted to be party chairman were abiding by this courtesy. They were all running because everybody knew Walter Mondale was going to lose and lose big. And so Pelosi lost that race. And one reason she lost was because she was very late getting out of the starting gate. So when she was then running against Hoyer to get into the Democratic leadership, and I gave the wrong date before, this would have been in she was like 19, this would be in 1991. She didn't wait for there to be an opening. She just started to run for the next opening in the leadership. And that was one of the things that took back all these guys who had thought they had been all lined up for who was going to come next. So that is also a lesson that she applied after that, was don't wait around. You got to get started. If there's something you want, you better get started going after it.
So you were talking about the famous tap on the shoulder. I'm not sure if I could put it that way. I was just wondering if you could talk about what do you think characterizes the way she speaks with her members? So when, for example, in the LBJ series by Caro, Lyndon Johnson is characterized by he's a sort of a bully, I think. And he tends to poke people, he tends to shake them. I'm just wondering, what do you think characterizes Madam Speaker Pelosi's way of communicating with people, of getting their support?
Well, another reporter, John Bresnahan, once called Pelosi an iron fist in a Gucci glove, which is just about the perfect description of her. But let me tell you about the one time that I felt that tap on the shoulder, which was, I was working on the book, and it was my 9th interview. I had 10 interviews for this book. So this is very late in the process. And I'm asking her about an episode, and she doesn't like it. And she starts to argue with me that this episode in her life shouldn't be in the book. It wasn't important. it didn't mean anything. Why was I going to include it? And I said, well, I think it illuminates something about you. So I do think I should include it. And she didn't want me to include it. And, it's not that she didn't do what LBJ would have done, probably raise his voice and crowd the chair. She just kept asking more and more pointed and insistent questions. She forced me over and over again to defend and explain my point of view. She seemed to get bigger. I mean, she's like not that tall. She's like 5'6", 5'5". She seemed to get, the longer we talked, the bigger she got. And at the end of this conversation, we agreed to disagree. She wasn't happy with me, but I said I was going to include this episode in the book. But when I left, I was completely nonplussed. I tried not to show it to her, but I was really shaken. And I went out, this was about 3:00 in the afternoon. I went out, I got in my car, I drove home. I poured myself a glass of wine. I climbed into bed and I started watching TV reruns because she had this very intimidating way about her. And I can only, there was nothing she could really do to punish me, but I can only imagine what that would have felt like if I had been a member of Congress, dependent on her for all kinds of things like committee assignments and favors. If we had been in a conversation like that, I think I might well have folded.
I thought of this phrase that was in John Boehner's memoir, where he said something about leaders not being able to lead if they don't have a flock behind them or a group of people behind them. I'm wondering if other than, how could I say, slightly veiled threats, because after all, politicians usually use slightly veiled threats. What do you think other tools she uses are? I'm not sure if it's a clear question.
Well, she uses carrots and sticks, right? So the carrots can be a committee assignment you want. It can be doing a fundraiser for you. It can be letting you go on a congressional delegation to a place like Rome. That would be considered a big plum. It's letting your legislation come up on the floor. Those are the carrots she can do. She's got sticks too. She can not refuse to give you the committee assignment you want. She can refuse to put you on congressional delegations. She can make sure your legislation doesn't go anywhere. And it's hard to overstate her power. Speakers in the past, some of them have been very powerful and some of them haven't. There has never been a speaker as powerful as Nancy Pelosi. Power is centralized in the speaker's office. When there was a big discussion about whether to impeach Donald Trump, which came up twice here, all that mattered was what Nancy Pelosi thought. She once said to an aide, every Democrat in the House can want to impeach him. We're not going to impeach him if I'm against it. And they didn't. It was only when she was persuaded about to follow impeachment that it was launched. And then whoever succeeds her will not, I think, at least instantly be as powerful as she is, because she is the most powerful speaker in the history of the United States.
I was wondering if it's fair to say that Speaker Pelosi's pillars of power are, on one hand, fundraising, on the other hand, the position as speaker, and perhaps on the third hand, her allies, because you do talk about her allies in your book. Could you just give us an example of when it was so important for her to have these really close allies? I'm not sure if it's a clear question.
Well, she does have very close allies, and she installs her allies as chairs of the committees. I mean, that's another position of power in the Congress. And in fact, there was another Congresswoman from California, Jane Harman, who wanted to be chair of the Intelligence Committee. And she had been the ranking Democrat on the Intelligence Committee. So she was kind of in line to get this. Pelosi didn't think of her as a good enough ally, and she prevented her from getting this position. And Harman eventually left Congress because she couldn't get this position she wanted. So she makes sure that the members who are in some key places are her allies. And she develops new alliances. For instance, Ilhan Omar is a member of the Squad. She's a controversial, very liberal member of the House from Minnesota. And Pelosi has really cultivated her from the time she was running for office. And even though Ilhan Omar can give Pelosi some trouble, they have a real relationship, and that's because Pelosi has been determined to do that. We only have a couple minutes left, but I want to ask you, because I've got to go do a TV thing. I want to ask you a question, which is, what do people in Italy think about Nancy Pelosi?
Unfortunately, people in Italy don't talk about politics that much. Because in Italy, we haven't had that, how could I call it, polarization of politics yet. So we haven't had consultants, and we haven't had, how could I call it, edge issues. So issues that politicians can just hammer on to try to get a very small segment of the electorate to vote for them. So yeah, we haven't had that phenomenon yet. We don't talk about foreign politics a lot. We talk about Europe, and we talk about Ursula von der Leyen, but that's about it.
Well, that's interesting. I'm not sure that's a bad thing in your politics, not to be so polarized. But anyway, go ahead.
I'm going to try to go really quickly. So what do you think Madam Speaker Pelosi would suggest, or would have suggested, to Speaker Boehner to have better control, or to control his caucus?
Yeah. Well, it was interesting. She had, Boehner was you read his book, he's a very likable guy. And he's somebody who's willing to cut a deal. But he complained to me that Pelosi was not willing to cut a deal with him because she's pretty staunch Democrat. And he also had this problem with the very conservative members, the Freedom Caucus, rising during his time as Speaker. So she was pretty contemptuous of Boehner for not being able to control his caucus. Now, Boehner argues that there was no way to control this group of Republicans who did not really have legislation. They mostly wanted to block things, not to do things. But he never showed this when he was Speaker. He never showed the kind of skill at holding his caucus together that she did. It's a famous picture when she lost the speakership. One of the unusual things about Pelosi is that she was in the minority, she was in the majority, she was in the minority and got back in the majority. And usually if you lose the majority, you lose your leadership position. Her ability to hold on to that has been an interesting thing to see. But when she lost the majority and stopped being Speaker, it was John Boehner who became Speaker. And there's a famous picture of her. Boehner had a constituent who had given him this enormous oversized gavel. And when she had to turn over the gavel to him, which was like a ceremony in the House, she had to hand him this huge gavel. And there's actually kind of a funny picture that shows the two of them together.
What do you think are Madam Speaker's power moves? So what does she do to show that she has power, if she does?
Well, just last week, she showed she had power by pushing through this big spending bill that President Biden backed. He's the fourth president she's dealt with as the Democratic leader of the House. That is a pretty remarkable series. She was really responsible for pushing through the domestic agenda, first for Barack Obama with his healthcare plan, and then for Joe Biden just in these last few weeks. She pushed through important legislation for George W. Bush when the economy melted down in 2008. She was less happy about bailing out a Republican president, but she did. And then, of course, her relationship with Donald Trump is pretty legendary. They were quite at odds, and have not, they stopped speaking in October of 2019. So he was president for a year and several months while she was Speaker of the House, and them not speaking to each other. You said your politics aren't polarized. Our politics definitely are. And I'm so sorry. I've got to go do this Washington Week thing on PBS. But I want to thank you so much for being interested in my book and for reading my book and for asking such smart questions. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much.
You bet. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.